Max Slayton had been investigating infamous legends with his father Jerry since he was 16. They both shared a unique fascination of mythical creatures that only grew bigger with time. Their first investigation had them travel to the Scottish Highlands in search of evidence of the Loch Ness Monster's existence. They didn't attain much, but it was a start into their journey as investigators. By 2008, they had been doing this for almost 10 years. They traveled the globe and learned so much, not just about the legends, but about themselves. Max and Jerry had investigated pretty much every alleged creature out there, except for one. The Sargasso Sea creature. It allegedly first appeared in the year 1917. A ship was sailing through the Sargasso Sea when a number of passengers claimed to have seen this bizarre-looking creature staring back up at them from the water. They described it as having glowing white eyes and unusually long claws. Sightings of it continued to grow as the years went by. What added a little more credibility to this legend was that 60% of people who sailed across the Sargasso Sea were never seen again. Max had been obsessed with this for years and desperately wanted to further investigate. Jerry's phobia of the sea was the only thing stopping them. Jerry's crippling fear had been plaguing him since he was a child. He was fine with small bodies of water such as lakes, but when it came to the large, ominous sea, an aggressive form of anxiety would torture Jerry. After years of putting it off, he finally agreed to investigate the Sargasso Sea creature. This was the big one. The idea of being on a boat sailing through the Sargasso Sea made Jerry feel uneasy. But he knew he had to do it, not just to cure his own curiosity, but his son's as well. Jerry and Max set sail across the Sargasso Sea in their rented cabin cruiser. Max was loving every second of it, while his father tried not to be sick. He made as little eye contact as possible with the water that surrounded him. 2 hours into sailing, Max brought the cruiser to a stop. It was now stationary in the middle of the sea. The sun was starting to fade, which meant that it wouldn't be long before the sea had a more sinister appearance. Jerry was struggling, but he tried to keep as brave of a face as possible. Max checked the time. It was 6 p.m. He put on his scuba diving gear and prepared to dive into the deep water. Before doing so, Max put his hand on Jerry's shoulder, trying to comfort him. "Thank you for doing this, Dad. I know how tough this is for you." "I appreciate that, Max. Just do me a favor. Be safe. Please." Max gave his dad a thumbs up as he got into position. Jerry had to turn away as Max dived into the sea in search of some kind of evidence. 10 minutes went by. There was no sign of Max. Jerry impatiently sat on the boat, staring at the floor. He couldn't wait to get out of there. As Jerry waited for Max to ascend, his anxiety reached a new level as the cruiser slightly began to tremble. Jerry's heart pounded against the flesh that protected it. He had no idea what was happening. Then the trembling stopped. Minor relief swept over Jerry, but that was short-lived. Max suddenly rised from the water. He was completely naked. His chest had giant red claw marks, and his mouth dripped dark, thick blood. Jerry tried pulling his son back onto the boat, but something kept jolting him back over the edge. Jerry felt intense terror as something began to ascend from behind Max. He couldn't believe it. A creature's shadow hovered over Max's back. It had dark purple glossy skin, glowing wide eyes, giant grey claws, and oddly shaped black teeth. Its body was similarly shaped to a human's, but it was 5 times the size. Jerry knew exactly what he was staring at. The Sargasso Sea creature. Its presence made Jerry freeze in fear. The creature reached out its large claws and grabbed Max by his torso. It glared at a terrified Jerry before pulling Max back into the water. Despite his frightened state, Jerry's fatherly instincts kicked in. Jerry jumped into the sea he had feared his entire life to try and save his son. Jerry couldn't swim, so he immediately started to descend to the very bottom. And waiting for him was the creature and the severely mutilated body of Max. Grant Daly was a successful lawyer with a 20-year career. His father before him was also a lawyer, and he was even more successful. Grant had a strict upbringing. He was told that he had to follow in his father's footsteps. If he didn't, he would be considered a failure and a disgrace to the Daly name. Grant always tried to please his father, mainly by mirroring his life. Grant got married when he was 28 to schoolteacher Laura Nettles. Together, they brought their daughter Mia into the world. From the outside looking in, you would think that they were a happy family, but that couldn't have been any further from the truth. Grant Daly had been living with a lifelong secret. He was gay. He had known since he was a young boy, but was too terrified to tell anyone, in fear of being cast out of his family. He married Laura to please his father, but when he suddenly died of a heart attack one evening, Grant realized that he couldn't keep this secret any longer. He had to tell someone. Grant finally told Laura the truth, and her reaction planted the seeds for something much sinister. Laura laughed in his face and told Grant that she had always known. Grant was stunned. "The only reason I haven't left you is because of the money. You try and take that away from me, and I'll tell the whole world your precious secret. We understand each other?" Grant nodded his head passive-aggressively. As unhappiness festered away inside Grant, he began to develop somewhat of a relationship with a man online. Villick Strands worked as a waiter in an African restaurant. He and Grant would text daily, getting closer and closer, to the point where they both expressed their undying love for one another. Despite being so far apart and living much different lives, they both wanted the same things. Grant wanted out of his marriage to Laura, but he wanted to do it without his sexuality being exposed to his family and friends in America. Grant had grown to hate his wife, and from that hate, a horrific plan was initiated. Grant asked Villick to kill his wife. He laid out his big master plan, where he'd take Laura out on vacation to Africa and book a hotel not too far away from the restaurant Villick worked at. Villick was unsure, "It's the only way out, Villic," said Grant over the phone. "It's the only way we can be together. If I do it, I'll eventually be found out. But if you do it, no one will ever know or suspect a thing. Please, I'm begging you. I just want to be with you." "Okay, I'll do it. For us." After weeks of convincing, Laura agreed to go to Africa with Grant. On the first night there, Grant met Villic in person for the first time to go over the plan. They both embraced passionately, as they knew the wait was almost over. The next night, Grant went to a local bar, where he ordered a large scotch, waiting on a text from Villic saying that it was done. It took longer than expected, but the text finally came through. Grant downed his third scotch, and made his way back to the hotel. Upon opening the door, he was instantly greeted by pieces of glass smashed all over the floor. Grant then noticed a small trail of blood that led into the bathroom. He cautiously approached. As he slowly opened the door, a sickening feeling penetrated his stomach. Laid in the bathtub, with a gunshot wound to the head, was Villic. "Were you expecting someone else?" said Laura, as she stood in the dark corner of the room, holding a gun. "What have you done?" "I only did what you told your little boyfriend to do to me." "What? You didn't think I knew what you were planning?" "Come on, Grant. It was obvious. Give me some credit." The suppressed hatred Grant had for Laura morphed onto his face. He had never hated anyone as much as he hated her. "You're going to jail for a very long time, Laura." "Oh, I'm not the one who's going to jail. You are," said Laura, as faint sirens could be heard coming from a distance. "Conspiracy to commit murder, right? That's what you and your boy toy planned. I only acted in self-defense. I'll be fine. But you, on the other hand, won't be. Everyone will know your secret, and you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life, as you rot away in a jail cell." The horrific murder of Alfie Tickens sickened the small town of Vinewood. Alfie was a quiet man that didn't bother anybody. He was a harmless hermit who lived in a big wooden shed out in the woods. His favorite place to be was at a nearby lake he fished from daily. All he ever ate was fish. One day, while Alfie sat in his chair, fishing rod in hand, he was approached by two teenage boys, Duke and Mason. The boys started picking on Alfie, calling him a freak, while also mocking his dark red fishing hat and camouflaged body warmer. Duke took the bullying a step further by dragging Alfie out of his chair and onto the dampened ground. Alfie took off running back through the woods back to his woodshed. Before he was able to open its door fully, Duke caught up with him and threw a closed fist into the back of his head. Alfie fell to his knees. Duke glanced at Mason and asked for the pocket knife in his jean pocket. Mason didn't know what to do. He didn't want to hurt this man, but he also didn't want to get hurt by Duke either. Mason reluctantly handed Duke the knife. Alfie glared into Mason's eyes. Mason pitied him. He never wanted it to go this far. Duke cruelly sliced Alfie's throat. Mason was horrified. Laughing, Duke then took off running in the direction he came from. Mason followed suit. A dying Alfie somehow managed to crawl his way back into the woodshed. He got close to his clock that ticked away his final seconds. It was a family heirloom that had been passed down by 3 generations. Alfie laid his head on it as he took his final breath. He had turned still for all eternity. The last thing he ever heard was the ticking of his priceless clock. A few months had passed. Duke didn't have a care in the world. Mason, on the other hand, was riddled with guilt. Duke goaded him to come on a bike ride down near the lake. Alfie's favorite lake. As soon as they arrived, Mason wanted to leave immediately. Duke chuckled at Mason's fear, before walking to the very spot where he first targeted Alfie. "That wuss Alfie Tickens got what was coming to him," said a sociopathic Duke. Then something extremely unusual started to happen. Both Mason and Duke started to hear the sounds of a ticking clock. They didn't know where it was coming from, but it got louder and louder as each second passed. The ticking was now deafening. Mason's eyes then began to fill up with terror as he saw a hand rise from the water. It grabbed Duke by the lower leg and tried to pull him into the lake. Another hand rose from the water, but this one held a pocket knife. The pocket knife. The left hand which held the knife penetrated it into Duke's leg. He cried in agony as he got pulled into the water. Everything went eerily silent. Mason was stood there, on the verge of a breakdown. Then he almost had a heart attack as Duke jumped up from the water, gasping for air. Half of his face had been mutilated. Mason took off running into the woods. He didn't know where he was going. His survival instincts just told him to run. Then he stopped. Mason started to get teary-eyed as he stared at the old woodshed. Alfie's woodshed. As soon as he laid his eyes on it, the loud ticking that plagued his ears immediately stopped. The door of the woodshed slowly opened. Alfie Tickens stood in the doorframe. His face was a dark shade of purple, and his wounded neck still dripped his blood. "I'm sorry," cried Mason. Sorry wasn't good enough for Alfie. Mason and Duke are still missing. The only trace of them was a pocket knife with the name Duke Milston engraved on the handle. Alfie Tickens' blood was confirmed to be on the knife, as well as Duke's fingerprints. Rumors circulated around Bywood, and from those rumors, a legend was born. As the legend goes, if you stand near the Bywood Lake and say the name Alfie Tickens, your eardrums will suffer from the sounds of a ticking clock. Alfie Tickens will then rise from the water and unleash his deadly rage. The last thing you will ever hear as your world fades to black is tick, tick, tick. Philip Revel was once a respected scientist. Among his peers, he was considered the very best in his field and was somewhat idolized. But unbeknownst to everyone, Philip had a secret. His sister Diana was dying of breast cancer. He was absolutely devastated of the news. He worshipped the ground Diana walked on, and would have happily swapped places with her if he could. Diana didn't want anyone knowing about her slow, agonizing illness, so she swore Philip to secrecy. Every day, Philip would paint on a smile and act like everything was fine, but on the inside, he was mentally decaying. On March 6, 1940, Diana Revel died peacefully in her bed. Philip knew it was coming, but even so, he felt like he had been hit by a truck. In the days and weeks after his sister's death, Philip vowed to come up with a cure for cancer, but he was in no fit state to do so. His mind had become hazy, and he was crippled by grief. Despite that, Philip continued on. Over the course of 12 months, Philip had been devoted to finding a cancer cure. So committed, in fact, that he resigned from his job of 17 years. His former colleagues were worried about him. He didn't seem himself. All he did was stay in his house all day and research. Philip barely slept or ate to keep his strength up. He was like a completely different person. His grasp with reality wasn't what it used to be. Philip finally came up with a formula that he felt was ready to be tested. Now he just needed volunteers. After weeks of searching, Philip tracked down 3 women who were all battling some form of cancer: Linda, Mary, and Jessica. Linda had lung cancer, Mary had stomach cancer, and Jessica had breast cancer. Philip offered them $10,000 each to come to his house and take part in the experiment. Linda and Mary agreed without hesitation. Jessica, on the other hand, was still unsure. "Listen to me, Jessica. I'm fairly confident that this formula works, and you could be one of the first to be cured from this disease that's been eating away at you. Don't you want that?" Philip's convincing words were enough to get Jessica on board with the experiment. A week later, the women arrived at Philip's house, beaming with excitement. For the first time in so long, they had hope. Philip brought them down to the basement, which was his home lab, and began proceedings. He filled up a needle with a pink, gooey liquid substance and injected it into the women's arms. Philip then walked over to the end of the basement, where a big object was being covered by a red sheet. Philip pulled the sheet down to reveal a huge steel structure. "I call this Sinclair," said Philip. "You ladies are going to step inside this marvelous machine of mine, and when you step back out, you'll all be cancer-free. That's a promise." The women's eyes looked on in awe as Philip opened its large steel door. Linda and Mary fast walked into it, while Jessica took her time, slowly making her way inside. Philip gently closed the door and gave the women a thumbs up through the small circular window. He then stepped to the side and gingerly began pulling the big silver lever downwards. A loud alarm-like noise engulfed the room, indicating that the process was now beginning. Philip looked through the small window. Linda, Mary, and Jessica were all smiling back at him. But within a matter of seconds, those smiles turned into faces of terror. The 3 women all let out blood-curdling screams, as the inside of the machine started to fill with smoke. Philip rushed back over to the lever and turned off the machine, but it wouldn't stop. Philip was powerless. All he could do was stand there and listen to their cries for help. He fell to his knees and put his hands over his ears. He couldn't bear to hear them scream any longer. Then all of a sudden, the machine finally stopped. Eerie silence filled the basement. Philip cautiously approached the machine. He pulled open the door and was greeted by aggressive smoke. As most of it faded, Philip's eyes began to widen with disbelief. From within the smoke, the three distorted faces of Linda, Mary, and Jessica stared back at him. Their disfigured mouths were stretched wide open, and their skin was as white as snow. They didn't look human. They weren't human. Not anymore. Philip looked on in horror as the three women walked out of the machine. They had Philip in their sights. He backed himself up against the wall, begging for forgiveness. "I'm so sorry. Please, let me fix this." Philip's words fell on deaf ears. The three women now had him cornered. They all looked at one another before sinking their teeth into Philip's flesh. Philip Revel didn't just cure them of cancer, he cured them of being human. Now they were superhuman flesh eaters with one goal in mind: to feast upon anyone that got in their way. Nobody knows the exact day he started showing up, or where he came from. The other teenagers called him Shades, because they didn't know his name. All they knew was that he liked to read. He would sit on the grass all by himself and read books. Not the kind of books you'd think a teenage boy would be interested in. But Shades was far from a normal teenage boy. One day, as he sat reading his book, Shades was approached by a young girl, intrigued by what he was reading. "What are you reading there, stranger?" Shades looked up at her. "It's a novel about a child who was born with supernatural powers and uses them to wipe out the entire human race." "Okay, cool. My name is Lisa, by the way. And yours is?" A smile appeared on his face. "Shades, apparently." Shades got up and then walked away, further into the field. Lisa was fascinated by him. She wanted to know more. The next day, Lisa approached him again. This time she was better prepared with her questions. "How come I never see you in any of the classes? Shouldn't you be in a lot of trouble?" "Oh, I'll be fine. Trust me," said a confident Shades. "These teachers are far too focused on themselves to even give a shit about me." In the back of Lisa's mind, the question of why he wore those sunglasses loomed. But it slipped her mind, as well-known bully Drake Lookers headed towards them. Well, what do you know? Lisa has a thing for freaks. I never would have guessed. "Shut up, moron," said an irritated Lisa. "Are you gonna make me, Lise? No, I didn't think so." Drake ripped the book from Shades' hands, and then proceeded to spit into the pages he was reading, before throwing the book back at him. Later that day, as Lisa walked home from school, she was surprised to see Shades leaning against a tree, watching her. Lisa approached. Hey, are you okay? I know that douche Drake can be a real ass. I'm fine, Lisa. I've dealt with much worse. Trust me, Drake is nothing. As he said that, Lisa's looming question from earlier returned. Do you mind if I ask you a personal question? Ask whatever you want. Okay, well, why do you always wear those sunglasses? Do you not like your eyes? Are they sensitive to sunlight? What is it? Shades' mouth succumbed to an odd grin. If anyone were to look into my eyes, Lisa, they wouldn't survive it. Lisa seemed perplexed by Shades' answer. And why's that? She asked. Shades let out a little chuckle before walking away down the street. Her fascination of him continued to grow. A few days passed. Lisa hadn't seen Shades at school. She was worried about him. She sat in his usual spot, waiting for him, when she was approached by the arrogant Drake. Hey, honey. Are you looking for a good time? Oh wait, never mind. You're just waiting for that freak again, aren't you? He's not a freak, and he's 10 times the guy you will ever be. Drake became infuriated at Lisa for talking back to him. He grabbed her by the hair and pulled her in real close. You pathetic little creep. I think I need to teach you some manners. That won't be necessary, said a distant voice. Drake turned around to see Shades, standing 3 feet away from him. Well, look who it is, the leader of the Freak Nation. Tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a freak are you today? Shades smiled as he walked towards Drake. As they stood face to face, Lisa was shocked to see Shades reaching for his sunglasses. That shock turned to horror as she began to see his eyes. A menacing pair of dark red eyes stared into Drake's. He quivered with fear as he let Lisa go. Then something began to happen, which left Lisa horrified. Blood started to pour from Drake's eyes, and his skin started to bubble. His eyeballs popped out of his head, and his skin began to melt. Lisa had to turn away. When she looked back, Shades was gone. All that was left was the skinless body of Drake, laid out in the grass. Lisa never saw Shades again. It was as if he vanished off the face of the earth. She later learned that he wasn't even a pupil at her school. He just started turning up one day, with his book in hand. Lisa's fascination of him had reached an all-time high, and it still remains to this day. The only trace of Shades left behind was the sunglasses he left laying in the grass. Gretchen Carter was born into the world with little to nothing. Her parents worked 9-to-5 jobs, barely able to maintain food in their cabinets. Gretchen was picked on a lot in school for her poverty. Kids in her class would say the meanest of things, and those words stuck to Gretchen like glue. She would lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, praying to God that one day she would have enough money to look after herself, as well as her family. When Gretchen was 16, she suffered through even more trauma when her father, Shane Carter, was arrested for armed robbery. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but Shane didn't even serve one. On the day of his 18th wedding anniversary, Shane hung himself in his cell. Gretchen and her mother Martha truly had nothing left. One night, as Gretchen laid in her bed, she once more wished and prayed to God to relieve her of the financial hell she had lived since birth. And on this night, someone was listening. Gretchen immediately sat up in her bed when she heard a voice call out her name from across the room. "Gretchen, dear child, what is it that you seek?" She stared into the dark corner of her room. A face with dark red skin lurked in the darkness. "Who are you?" said Gretchen. "I am Satan, dear, and I am here to grant your wish, but only under one condition." A confused expression morphed onto Gretchen's face. "And what's that?" "I will grant you your wish, child, but as long as you shall live, no male being will ever acknowledge your existence." "Why are you willing to help me?" A sinister smile began to form on Satan's face. "Because I detest God, and given that he won't help you, I will, but only to spite him. I will give you unlimited riches, but you must agree to my terms. Now, do we have a deal?" Gretchen subtly nodded as the red face faded further away into the darkness. The next morning, Gretchen was awoken by her mother's exciting screams. "We're rich, honey. We're rich." Gretchen felt like a massive weight had been lifted off of her body. No more would she live in a world of poverty. She was over the moon about it, but in the back of her mind, sadness loomed. The thought of a man never noticing her or loving her hurt, but she was too young to realize just how much. As the years went by, Gretchen flaunted her money at anyone who would listen, especially those who mocked her for having so little. She had almost everything she ever wanted. Nice clothes, a big house, a beautiful car, and a bank account full of endless zeros. Despite having so much, something was missing in Gretchen's life, and she knew exactly what it was. A person to love, a person to share her life with. Gretchen envied every woman who had a man by their side. She knew she would never have that, which depressed her immensely. As Gretchen sat in front of her TV, half asleep, there was a loud knock at her front door. As Gretchen opened it, she saw 2 police officers standing in front of her. "Are you Miss Gretchen Carter?" said one of the officers. "Yes. What seems to be the problem?" "Ma'am, a body was found in the woods this morning. We believe it to be of your mother, Martha Carter." Gretchen's heart sank. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. In the early hours of the morning, Martha had went into some nearby woods and hung herself. Gretchen was heartbroken. She was now truly alone. The unlimited money she had at her disposal now brought her nothing but misery. A constant reminder of what she gave up. The chance to be loved, to have kids, to grow old with someone. The idea of being alone for the rest of her life brought Gretchen nothing but sadness. She couldn't live her life that way. Gretchen tried resummoning Satan, but she received no reply. She felt trapped in a life that she no longer wanted, and now she was ready to bring it to an end. Gretchen walked to a nearby cliff, which was only half a mile away from her house. As she got to the edge, her heart started pounding like it never had before. She looked down at the ominous sea that stared back at her. In that moment, Gretchen realized that despite her misery, she didn't want to die. "Hey, are you okay, lady?" said an unknown voice coming from behind her. Gretchen turned around and saw a handsome man. with mesmerizing blue eyes staring back at her. For the first time in almost 10 years, a man was acknowledging her. She was so happy. That feeling of happiness turned to terror when the man unexpectedly shoved her towards the edge of the cliff. Gretchen tried to hold her balance, but it was near impossible due to the strong winds that plagued the morning. Gretchen went over the edge. As she descended from the cliff, on her way to a watery death, she glared back up at the handsome face of the man. Her eyes filled with horror as it morphed into the face of Satan. Now it all made sense. It was never about spiting God. It was about spreading misery. A disturbing smile took center stage on Satan's face as Gretchen was engulfed by the sea, washed away by eternal darkness. Derek Levy began his YouTube journey in 2014. He had dreams of making it big on the platform, earning millions of views and subscribers, making a fortune in the process. Derek's vision for the channel shape-shifted over time. It was supposed to be a Marvel comic book review channel, but then it morphed into a movie review channel. Derek loved talking about the latest Marvel releases. It was his opportunity to get his opinion out there. Derek didn't have any friends or family to speak to. After the death of his father, he pushed everyone away and barely even left the house. The only time he would leave was for his job at Walmart, which he despised. All Derek wanted was to become a successful YouTuber. He wanted that more than he had wanted anything in his entire life. Fast forward to 2021, and Derek hadn't made any groundbreaking process. Over the course of 7 years, Derek had only earned 1,000 subscribers, and his videos averaged the same as they did when he first began YouTube. To say that Derek was disheartened would be an understatement. He had put his heart and soul into trying to make this channel a success, but it just wasn't happening. One day, while scrolling through YouTube, Derek found himself clicking on a video from a YouTuber he had never seen before. Marvel Freak 99, otherwise known as James. As the video began to play, Derek went to the About section of James's channel. It said he created it in January 2021, which was 2 months ago. In 2 short months, James had gained 2,000 subscribers, and his videos averaged around 800 to 1,000 views. Some slight jealousy crept into Derek's feelings. Then that jealousy turned to hatred when he started watching James's video. Condescending, arrogant, and pig-headed. Those are the words Derek would use to describe James. James claimed to be the only true Marvel fan out there, and that everyone else were merely posers. Derek for sure thought that James's channel would flatline due to his overbearing arrogance. But that couldn't have been any further from the truth. 6 months went by. The YouTube channel Marvel Freak 99 now had 100,000 subscribers. Derek's channel, on the other hand, still only had 1,000. Derek had become so bitter. He was enraged that such a horrible person like James had achieved so much success. Derek made threats towards James, saying that if he didn't leave YouTube, there would be consequences. James blocked Derek on all social media platforms, and then made a video about the threats. He didn't name Derek by name, but he heavily alluded to him. This wasn't the thing that made Derek snap though. What made him snap was James's next video. A video of him unboxing his silver YouTube button. James took the silver button out of a big brown box, which had James's home address on the side. He must have forgotten to blur it out. Derek was disgusted, not just by James, but by all of his subscribers. He felt as though he had to do something. The wheels in Derek's head started to turn. A sinister plan was beginning to form. In the early hours of a September morning, Derek broke into James's home address. As he slept, Derek applied duct tape to his hands, mouth, and feet before carrying him out of the house and laying him in the boot of his car. When James woke up, he found himself tied to a wooden chair in some abandoned warehouse. He was so confused. What the hell is going on? This isn't funny. Who's laughing? Said Derek as he emerged from behind James's chair. Why are you doing this? Pleaded a scared James. People like you make me sick. You make fun of people like me and get rewarded for it. I do the right thing and get nothing. How is that fair? You see, today, I'm gonna become famous, undeniable, and you, my friend, are the sacrificial lamb. I'm gonna take my time with you, James. Don't you worry. James was absolutely horrified as Derek pulled out a hunter's knife from his jean pocket. Derek then set up his iPhone on a tripod about 4 feet away from James. A subtle smile crossed Derek's face as he started live streaming from his YouTube channel. Derek slowly approached the trapped James. The smile on his face faded instantly and was replaced by pure anger. Derek then began to drive the hunter's knife into James's chest repeatedly. James's screams could be heard for miles as the knife continued to make contact with his skin. Derek stood back. A motionless James remained still. His light blue t-shirt was drenched in blood. Derek went over to his phone. He was shocked when he saw the number of people that were watching. 50,000 people had just watched Derek end James's life. Finally, after years of grinding away, Derek was finally getting the attention he had always wanted. He had never felt more proud. If I inspire you with my content, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video, hit the subscribe button, and slam that notification bell. Thank you very much.